This thing on? Okay. Hi, folks. Quick note about this week's episode. I'm very happy and privileged and honored to have the great Markus Reuter here for the interview, but you basically don't get to see his face in the whole episode thanks to my lack of foresight, lack of preparation, and was kind of a little bit rushed going into it. So just a quick note to say, please don't hate me in the comments for the fact that you can't see my guest in this podcast. I will get better as the studio develops and I get my set sorted out, but enjoy the interview. It's really all about the conversation and not actually looking at us at all, and was a ton of fun. Really hope you enjoy it and get some useful information out of it. There are so many places we could start. I've got to pick one.
Yeah.
And that is harmonic palette.
Okay.
Just because, as with every interview I ever do, I dive deep into research and what's going on and where you're coming from. And it's an amazing experience to listen to your discography and not even need to know what instrument you play.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, This is one of the few times I've listened to music on Spotify and not been like, damn, I need to find out who's on this record.
Yeah.
So not only instrumentally and is it a very diverse thing, it's harmonically very, opposing ends of the harmonic spectrum are encompassed in what you do.
Yes.
Can you point to a connecting thread in that when I listen to your string quartet stuff, for instance, or to the ambient duets or stuff with SF Circus or any of these projects?
Yeah.
Is there a connecting thread, or are you on a project by project basis with that?
Well, the connecting thread is that I think of myself as a composer first. So, people, think of me as like a touch guitarist or playing with Tony Levin and stuff like that. But I come from just, pure love for music and for, like my ideas to create sound worlds. Yeah. So, and that really is the connection. Like I studied, I study music like by the pitch, let's say. Like there's one note. And like, what does that note sound like in relationship to another note? And so that's what harmonic palette is relationships of notes to each other, obviously, right?
Right.
And then sort of like you start out like, like figuring out, I think I remember I was 10 years old and I played my first like median, like F minor to A minor or something like that. I got inspired by that, Yeah. So it's that sound that I like probably heard in some movie soundtracks or something, And then you try to understand, okay, like, in music theory that I had, like learned or known about at that time, that was wrong because the two, chords weren't in the same key. And so like I started realizing back then that it's not about like rules, but it's about relationships. And as you say, color. And color is relationship. So a relationship in time. So like harmony as a notes happening at the same time, but also as a progression. Right. So, and there's so much freedom, so much that can still be explored in that field alone that I got super inspired. So like that's really like the foundation. So it's at notes happening at the same time, but also how harmony unfolds.
Right.
And both of those make color.
So it's interesting the again opposing ends of the spectrum in terms of what I imagine. A lot of the stuff I heard was improvised and somewhat free, but then there are some very like strict forms that you adhere to at the same time.
Yes.
That like just where you sit on that and why you choose one over the other. Is it about the orchestration? Is it about the ensemble, the situation, the project?
I think of improvisation as instant composition. And what has always been important for me is like what is the difference between it's I don't even see these opposing things there, like composition and improvisation. In improvisation you want to create form. And if you create form, it becomes what people call composition. Right? So anybody who wants to play a good solo, let's say, composes. Like because you it's not just that you're adding random phrases to each other. Like you play a phrase and it has sort of like for lack of a better term, like some sort of meaning or expression to it. Yeah. And then you take a breath or you wait and you play your next phrase. And it's actually, that's also what I think what people mean, what is that the music is between the notes. It's sort of like, okay, so when do I start the next phrase? What is the next expression? And only again, like the relationship of these modules, if we want to call them that way, make the structure. And you know, I come also from background of like the free improvisational scene actually of the 60s, because when I was starting to study at Bielefeld University, I was in an improvising orchestra called the Chaos Orchestra.
Nice.
And the guy who was leading it, he was at that time was already 66 or something. So he was really he is a free improvising musician from the 60s, where the idea was you never repeat yourself. So sort of
that
like
was the mandate.
That was the mandate.
Okay.
So and my idea like was already, okay, I can have that freedom, but I can allow myself to remember what I did a minute ago or 3 minutes ago. So, and by actually allowing oneself to have the memory and the capacity to memorize the notes that I played, like the kind of rhythm I played, so like keeping track of what you did. So even though you can be completely free, if you allow your memory to log what you did, you can kind of come back to things, and that way you create structure, compositional structure within improvisation. And that has sort of like become my mandate in a way, to always create musical structure, create composition as I improvise, also with other people.
Right. And was that mandate literal? Like literally don't repeat, or was there an element and space for motivic development, for instance?
Not within the ideas of my teacher.
Wow.
Right.
So that was extreme.
That
literal,
was extreme.
Yeah.
And I kind of like did that, and it was fascinating, because it gives you like a certain freedom and also awareness of what you're doing. Because even if you're kind of asked to avoid, you still have to keep track of what you did.
Right.
Right. And so that's sort of like how I learned the basic tool set, like the skill set of being able to always, like, how should I say this? Sort of thematic development kind of like comes in improvisation, comes from the ability to keep track of what you're doing, and also to being able to repeat what you've already done.
Right.
And
I think I've had that view as a macro view. I've always tried to never make the same album again. Like if I look at the arc of my career, of my recording output, I'm like, I want to do something completely different. I don't want to repeat anything. Maybe on the micro level, I haven't had that as much as I possibly could. Have you experienced that with your output, which is vast, by the way?
Yes, it is.
Is that a conscious thing?
I mean, it's, but I wouldn't say that like sometimes I have like these themes where, say, I can put out an album that uses like the same process, let's say, and it's sort of like a part 2 of something.
Okay. Serialized.
Yes. Which particularly makes sense if there's something that kind of like works for me and for people, right? So because like there was in the mid noughties, I had a hit on Pandora, like a track that was played 5 million times per year, and and at some point, like way later, 15 years later, so I said, okay, why don't I just try to make another track in that vein? And then I did 3 albums in that vein of that one track. So yeah, that happens. But no, I agree. Like because we need to also look after ourselves in terms of what inspires us, so what feeds us as musicians. And like doing the same thing twice, like, or 3 or 4 times, same approach, same concept, it's not inspiring to most musicians.
So let's drill down into that, because there are a lot of people that we know, possibly we both know personally, but we definitely know as iconic musicians in, let's say, the jazz world, the improvised music world, who actually do that. And have done that for decades. They do make kind of the same record over and over again. Where do you think, is that a security thing? Is that an ego thing? Is that coming from a place of fear that they have something that works and then they just want to keep doing that for fear of something failing?
I mean, I don't know. I think it's always down to the individual. Like I don't know what the motivations or the factors are. I guess like all of the things that you just mentioned may play a role. I don't know. I think it's also actually a generational thing. Like if I'm thinking about it, because there was a time when it was safe to do something safe. Like nowadays, doing something safe is not going to be successful really as much as it used to be.
Interesting.
That's what I think.
So that generation of people hanging over from that era are just doing that because
they're doing the things they are known for because they had like enough mainstream exposure.
But had they started now, it would not
be different. I'm sure it would be different. Yeah. Also because like the whole climate of how people were. I don't know if I just came up with this new word, like business-fying something. Like you're turning something into a business that actually is not a business, and that includes like a jargon, like how to talk about things. And I think a lot of how like the generation before the business broke down, like 20 years ago, you sort of like get stuck in those ways. And I think it's probably going to be the same for me. I'm going to get stuck in the ways of the past 20 years for my upcoming 20 years. I don't hope that's going to happen.
So nobody's immune, really.
No, nobody's immune. And I don't know. I think I just really believe that nowadays, if you're authentically yourself, that's still the way to go. And I think it always was,
I always say, like, when I'm in the studio making a record, I never play for the audience. I play for myself. Is that something you identify with as well in the music you make?
Totally.
Okay.
I mean, also, and like I have to take this with a grain of salt, like what I'm saying now. But I really don't even like that. There's no, like, how could I know what people will think or feel or. So that's why for me it's kind of like pointless trying to do something that somebody would process in a certain way because you never know. And there's so many factors in music. Like,
I think there's a healthy way to look at it. That's exactly the way I look at it. But I hear so many people that don't look at it that way, and they're like, "Oh, we did this thing. It was super successful. We know what our audience wants." It's like you're shortchanging the audience.
Do you really think that musicians would say that if there wasn't like the framework, like the business framework in it, like?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. It's changed. Like the landscape has changed. The framework is completely different from the 70s, for instance.
So that's why I think, I mean, if it's also like about the individual objective, let's say, right?
Right.
Okay. So what do you want? What do you want? If you want financial wealth or even just some sort of safety, don't be a musician. Or like if you're a musician and you have some sort of success and you think you need to hold on to it, you can't think yet that you would be able to move into some other field of work to make money. Then probably it could make sense. Yeah, let's hold on to the formula and exploit it as long as it works. I mean, I have no problem with that. I think it's good if people. It's kind of cool also if people that are kind of like creative at first, let's say, and then they can actually modify themselves in a way to do things differently. I kind of appreciate change in people, so I think it's kind of cool. What is not cool is if those people are very unhappy. Right. And like some people, turn up on my couch, so to speak, that need help kind of like regaining their original vision and their original love for what they originally set out to do. Because that can happen, that you like suddenly you look back, the last 30 years I didn't really do what I wanted to do. And that can be painful.
Is that something you run into professionally a lot in your like other jobs, shall we say? Yeah,
I do.
Specifically with musicians?
Yeah.
Is that something do you work exclusively with musicians?
It's not my aim to do that, but it's mostly musicians that end up working with me because it's sort of like part of my overall approach to teaching music is to also look at the psychological aspects.
Sure.
Not overtly, actually. It just comes up.
Sure. It's unavoidable.
Yeah. And as you know very well, like a personal practice is sort of like the most powerful tool for personal change, right? And so what I'm kind of like I'm working with ways to kind of like extend the exercise, let's say, from the purely physical and musical to also to the psychological side of things, right?
I don't think I've made advances as big as I have when I've made an advance that hasn't been mostly mental. You know what I mean? You hit this huge, I think, peak of like technical prowess in the beginning because all you do is play your instrument, and then it's like, okay, well, what the hell do I do now?
Yeah.
How do I maintain any kind of sanity throughout this journey?
You know, I think like the cultural social framework for like doing things, as you say, mentally or differently than different in a mental way, right? Would be it's not really encouraged in our culture, especially in the U.S. American culture.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's the difference in Europe with that in your experience? Is it more
it's
favorable?
It's a little easier to take your time, right? You don't have
less
as
pressure.
much pressure to kind of like, you know, for example, so when improvising, right? For me, the ideal would be to always at any point to be aware, if I want to be aware of the note that I'm playing, the actual pitch, the name of it, and more importantly, the relationship to, say, the root note.
Okay.
So the interval. And with that comes, obviously, as we said, like the color, the tensions, all of that. So ideally, even if you play like your 30-second notes, every one of those, you would want to be aware of what they do and what they sound like in terms of their tension.
Okay.
Right? So that is very, very difficult to attain. You can only attain that if you kind of like get that sort of level of understanding on a conscious level, and then you transfer it to the subconscious.
Right.
And at that point, you're simply moving your fingers, and I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're basically not thinking; you're just moving your fingers. But you know that because like our processor here is so much faster than what we can consciously grasp, so that we can be sure at some point that we are aware, but subconsciously, right? So the definition of awareness usually is that it's got to be conscious,
right?
But I believe that by making things conscious, they can be kind of transferred back to the subconscious, and you can have sort of like you can be sure and confident that your choices are not random.
So so when you're conscious of it, is that more in the practice routine, or is that on the stage, or where do you see that?
Like I'm talking about the practice routine.
Okay, good.
Right. So, and what I mean is like so in some cultures, like where there's a lot of pressure, people like always, and this I see this all the time. They want shortcuts.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I mean, and the shortcut simply doesn't exist.
No.
Right.
There's no shortcut to experience.
So
right?
thinking of playing, like chunk, like so in a way, a pitch, right? Say an A, it's an A, it's an absolute thing, right? So it's an A, but thinking of an A as part of a C major scale, let's say, right, is like you're chunking things. You're kind of like taking 7 notes and giving those 7 notes a name.
Yes.
So then some people believe that all they need to do is to play the C major scale on top of a C major chord, and then everything's going to be all right.
To sound good, yeah.
Yeah, but that's not the case.
No.
Right?
Right.
So the difference is really like, okay, like where do I chunk? And so if you're in a culture where it's allowed that you break things down, and that you're allowed to spend enough time with playing an A on a C major chord, let's say, you understand what it sounds like, right? And it's about that A. It's not about the A being part of the collection of the notes of the C major scale.
100%, yeah.
Yeah, and this is really, even though you could say, but it's the same thing. No, it's not.
No, yeah. I totally agree. And it's that minute immersion in each factor that I don't think is commonplace as much anymore. I know when I started, it's funny you say the note A. One of my strongest memories is understanding what A was on a G minor 9 chord.
Yes.
I mean, just like I can feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up right now, as I remember being 15 years old, sitting at the piano. Alison Moyet's arrangement of That Old Devil Called Love.
Yes.
And right?
Yeah.
What a weird, random place to get to it. It's like those of us who find bebop in Mike Stern, but then go back to Charlie Parker. I found that in Alison Moyet, and then went back to Frank Sinatra or something. But I played that voicing thousands of times. It wasn't like, oh, I understand this, clunk, 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 next.
Yes.
It was thousands of times, weeks of just that, not even another key.
Yes.
Just A in the context of G. Never mind B flat in the context of A flat. I think that is not promoted so much. I think the goal is so much more pressurized to attain.
Exactly. And it's, it's that richness that you experience there which really makes the difference. So now imagine you take away the G minor from the A, and all that's left is the A, right? So some people would say, oh, it's just an A. No, it's a whole world or millions of worlds, contextual worlds that this A can exist in. And it will always have a slightly different role and function, if you want to think in functions or color. And that awareness is, I got lucky because when I was like 3-4 years old, my parents started taking me to music school. And I remember it was like, Carl Orff, the composer, he sort of had also a method for teaching children. And so there was like the Orffsches Instrumentarium was called. So instruments for Orff's method, let's say. So, and it was individual blocks of a xylophone, so one note at a time. So that's how I got taught music. So they gave me an A first.
Wow.
I had an A. I'm not exactly sure it was an A. It could have been an E or whatever. But anyway, I had one note first, and I was banging as a child on that A. And then they gave me a G. And I heard okay.
Wow.
Well, so for me, even though, like I said, like everything is in the relation of the notes to each other, but there's also something absolute about each individual pitch. And what is absolute about it is that it's a whole universe of application. There's a whole universe of applications for each one of those notes out there.
Right.
So that was sort of like the start of how coming back to the idea of color, how I think of color. Also like one pitch, one note is color for me because I hear the overtones.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And like we're kind of blessed playing stringed instruments. So
a lot of them.
We have different ways to play the same note and different strings, and it's always sounding slightly different. And so there's
It puts bass or touch guitar so far down the list of priorities when it comes to what we do as musicians, I think.
Yeah.
To me, I always say I'm a musician who just happens to play the bass.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what
it's
I mean?
the same for me.
Yeah.
Same for me. And before we started talking, I just sat down on the piano and I played a little, right? And I don't play piano.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I'm totally with you. It's funny that when I do, I shunned social media. I got rid of all social media, like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the whole thing gone. But when I did used to post little clips of like me playing piano, the overwhelming number of comments like, "Wow, you sound like just like on the piano, like you do on the bass."
Yeah.
And not many people were kind to say that, but not that many people made the connection of why. And I find that kind of fascinating. That it's like, from a bass player perspective, how I hear it, it's like the bass player who learns to slap.
Yeah.
And they go on their gig and they play the slap solo and the crowd goes, whoa! And they're like, oh, this is good. I can use this for the next 40 years. And that's all they do for the rest of their career. And they don't go, it's like running 26 miles and they don't go the 0.2 miles to finish the marathon to discover the other world beyond it.
Yeah.
It's kind of fascinating that curiosity is not promoted.
Yeah. I agree.
And how is, from an educational standpoint, like I think like jazz school and all that kind of stuff is like one of the biggest scams in music education.
Yep, for sure.
Like those guys in the 50s and 60s didn't call it Dorian and Mixolydian and all these things. They just innovated music and melody and harmony and color, like you say. Where is that going in Europe, for instance? Do you see that?
Well, I'm not really that connected that much to that scene of because I do my own thing, right? But yeah, I did have some. I crossed paths with institutionalized education. I think, like, if we're not even talking about like the content or the curriculum itself, I think it's very much about the fact that everything needs to be a business these days,
Right.
and I think that is really where the tipping point somehow, where things go from potentially being art education, where
Yes.
I would say art education is something you cannot be a business.
Well, there's no curriculum, right,
Yeah,
for art education.
Exactly.
And without a curriculum, you can't convince mom and dad to spend all the money on
I guess that's what
little
it is.
Timmy. I know that's what it is here.
Yeah.
You couldn't possibly go to USC and spend $70,000 a year, which I believe is what it costs. If it was just, let's see what happens.
Yeah. But that's what
It's exactly what you need.
Exactly. And that's what would be worth 70,000.
Exactly.
And the thing is, like, you pay 70,000 to be like 90% of the time for entertainment.
Yeah.
Let's just call it entertainment. And it won't really get you where you need to be if you want to be an artist. It's also not a great word, artist.
Right.
But yeah, like, I mean, like, I don't know how we want to talk. Let's just call it artist.
Sure,
okay.
Sure.
So if you want to become an artist, it's about. I mean, some people say that you have to have something to say.
Okay.
Right. I kind of like don't agree with that so much. It's not about having to say something. It's more about what comes out.
Okay.
Right. So it's not that you have to have a thought that you want to.
You don't have to make a statement every time.
You don't know. Ideally you don't want to know what the utterance is, but you're kind of like training, but also giving your body experiences that will create a certain expression. Let's just call it.
Sure.
So I talked with Steve Coleman a few times.
Okay.
And Steve is a great teacher, but he's an arts teacher.
Okay. Okay.
Like, so, and he, I don't want to repeat the stories he told me, but he said, like, very much like the way the things that Charlie Parker did that were not music, he thought were very much influencing what he was doing as a musician.
Okay.
So how you act out in life, also how wide your range of behavioral, like, of expression is.
Yeah.
Like, can you be an aggressive person? Are you an aggressive person? Are you a softie?
Right.
Like, do you always try to be like in the middle? Right.
Yeah.
And like, do you allow yourself to actually use the word arsehole that we used like before we start recording? Like, do you allow yourself to sometimes be an arsehole? Yeah, of course. Yeah. And that sort of like shows in your playing, because then you allow yourself to play a wrong note, like what other people would consider to be a wrong note, and you can push things in a different direction.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that courage, right, like, if you're just working more for yourself, it's easy to kind of like make an alteration to the scale that sounds cool to you, but somebody else would hate it.
Sure.
Yeah, but if you're playing with other people, you always have to kind of like negotiate the social contract, let's say, and that is something that that people are not good at. That's why it's important to kind of like live a life, sort of like. Here's another example. I mean, Another example would be, do you only ever want to have one girlfriend in life, or boyfriend, or Yeah. So for some people, it's the best thing in the world. Right. And it's great. For myself, I have to say, like, I would have missed out on so many learning opportunities and experiences if I only ever had stayed with one person. And that's how I feel about music as well. I mean, music is my best friend, and music is my partner in a way.
Sure.
But I want to experience different versions.
Yeah, for sure.
Of that partner. And I want that partner to change also, to be allowed to change.
it's interesting to think about the disconnect of that with music education and what that ends up producing, and there's that whole set of instincts that seem to be missing in terms of the interaction and negotiating the social contract, like you said. That seems to be maybe a generational thing, again, something that's fallen by the wayside for a shorter attention span in the audience, perhaps, that seems to be there. Where do you see that?
I think it's what we already said. It's that people need to make money.
Yeah, okay.
Right? And that's why I mean, it's clever, and it's also not a bad thing per se to sort of like figure out what the rules are to create a certain sound, like jazz,
right?
Like the sound of jazz. I mean, which doesn't exist,
yeah.
But some people claim it exists because you can package it and you can sell it,
right?
And that's not bad per se. If the people who would take those chunks of information and they would process them, knowing that it's just one set of rules,
right?
And it can be useful,
yeah,
right? Like there's a lot in it that is very useful, right? But you need to be aware that it's not it.
A friend of mine put it so well. He said that Sylvester Stallone is not Rambo, and a lot of people think that he is. You know what I mean? I thought that was an amazing line. I've tried to use it as many times as I possibly can. It normally has this reaction from people who know what's up. But on so many levels, the way things are packaged, it convinces people that the thing is something that is very much not.
Yeah.
Which is scary to me. Like I with putting social media aside and concentrating more on my curiosity rather than the outside influence of what anyone else is doing, I've kind of managed to quieten that noise now. But you go out into the world and it creeps in. You can't avoid it unless you're going to be a complete hermit. That's what scares me, because that seems to be what is predominant, what is the overarching kind of mandate now, you know.
And there are just like certain myths out there that really destroy young people's souls. For example, like when it comes to improvisation, just this idea that you need to be able to hear what you play. Like, how can that be a starting point? I mean, like that's something to arrive at some point. Yeah, sure, I agree. But it can be a starting point. Like, how can you with no skill at all? How could you like translate something that maybe in your head or maybe not in your head?
Right.
Maybe you need to play it first to hear it.
Sure.
Right. So this is really like a horrible thing if you're starting from that point of like believing that you can only improvise if you can recreate what you hear in your head on your instrument. So no, that's why technique and sort of like also unmusical technique is a good thing, right? If you just kind of like learn to move your fingers on the stage,
right.
Let's say that it's like your ballet dancers on your stage, that is the fretboard, right? That is much more useful to become a good musician from the get-go than trying to believe you have to know what you're doing, right? So like my way of saying it is, let's start with or where we know something.
Yeah.
So
don't underestimate what you already know.
Yes,
right?
exactly. You start with things that you already know, and you build on top of those.
Yes, 100%.
So don't kind of like believe that you can only start improvising when you know what you're doing. No, you can improvise right away.
But I also think people don't understand that there is a progression like that, and they see the goal and they're like, no, I want to get to the goal, and there is the goal, and improvising kind of is that eventually, once you have all of those skills, it is hearing what you play, but that's based on a foundation of experience. And then they see the goal, and then there are like 500 people selling them on a lie that they can have that goal in 5 easy steps, or the only scale you ever need to know to improvise, blah, blah, blah. Like that's what they're being fed with, you know? It's like, oh, are you 100 pounds overweight? Use our diet pill. It's the only thing that will ever get you thin again. No, it isn't.
Exactly.
Stop eating cakes and take a walk every day, you know?
Yeah. And that really is the source, I think, of a lot of these misunderstandings. Let's just call them misunderstandings.
Yeah, sure.
And and I think it's relatively easy to remedy, and which is sort of like the funny thing about it. Like you only need to run into a good teacher, and a good teacher will sort you out. Right?
Yeah.
And so, like even the other day at the baked potatoes, somebody asked me, Markus, what is the one advice you would give to somebody? Again, like the classic
question.
And I said, get a good teacher.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a good answer as well.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah. And what I mean with teacher is not an institutionalized thing.
Yeah.
But a teacher.
Someone who cares, first of all.
Yeah.
Someone who's actually going to take you at face value and assess who you are, what you are, and listen to what you want. I always say, like, my only job as a teacher is to, like, be inspiring. You know, or like figure out all the parts of the framework that allow you to, you know, do what you want to do.
So this morning I taught a lesson, for example, right? And so this guy is sort of like a beginner kind of, and I blew his mind by just showing him, okay, like we have triads, and we have like 4 kinds of triads. If you want to think, if you're stacking thirds, right? And okay, so now like harmonize your C major scale, like the way that he already knew. I said, okay, now, so you can just decide that whenever you get to the 4th degree, like to the F, that you play a diminished chord instead of a major chord.
Right.
And you just make that decision. It doesn't, you know, it's just that for that brief moment when you get to that chord, you're sort of like changing to, what is it, like G flat major or whatever it then would be, like F diminished, right? Or something like that, right? So it just to give people sort of the freedom that you have like these colors even in the most basic structures,
right?
And all you need to do is to change one note. Or 2, right? And to give people the freedom to sort of like start sort of like experimenting.
Yeah.
Like find out like, okay, you don't even need to know that you're playing triads or whatever.
Right.
But for some people who are already sort of like in that system, the way that I work is and this is something that comes from because I'm as a psychologist, I'm working with sort of like something that used to be called NLP.
Okay.
So anyway, so to give people options.
Yeah.
That's sort of like the idea. So you're installing options in your behavior, and that behavior includes your thoughts. Right. So and if you just kind of like start moving the notes around of a triad, you realize, okay, which kind of combinations do I have here? And then you say, okay, like if I may be playing my C major scale, but I change whenever I get to the C major, I play a C minor chord.
Right.
So these very simple rules, they open those doors, and if you just do that for a few months, like you're a completely different person.
So there's an interesting follow-up. How regularly do you see enough students regularly to see that improvement over the course of months?
And over decades. I have students that will work with me over a decade. And that's why I also I don't think there's a one-fits-all solution ever.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Right?
I
so
totally agree.
Each person is individual. Each like the learning curve is different. Like some people need a lot of time. For some people it's almost like a switch.
Right.
You tell them something that's instantaneous.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with anything that the student offers.
Sure.
Right.
I don't have students, actually any students, like one-on-one students, so I don't get to see that arc. But I do notice when I go and do clinics, master classes at universities, I have very similar experiences of unlocking things with triads, very specifically, and chords and spread triads, and saying just move the middle note up an octave, and suddenly you have, whoa, what is this sound? You know, you're playing chords now. Whoa, that was literally the switch moments, right? So, but then I also see, I'm like, it's shocking to me that I get to see a second-year university student who is not aware of the form of a 12-bar blues in a major university.
I think it's even worse. I had the experience where some people didn't even know where the notes were on their instrument.
Right.
And I was asked to teach a course on recording, like studio work.
Okay.
And the people on my course, they didn't even know what the notes were.
Right.
So how I'm supposed, and this is, I mean, it's okay, but like it was a clear example for me that, you know, these institutions, they need to earn money, even though well, I don't know how that is with like institutions here, if they really not filtering out people that much, but I experienced that, and I think, and you know, like for me, and this is sort of like how I am, right? Like I could have gone and said, okay, this guy doesn't belong here. No, I did the opposite. I took the opportunity of this course to teach him.
Right. Yeah, sure.
So even though I was supposed to teach him how to record in the studio, I really took him at the side and said, and it worked.
Yeah.
And he was great. And he you know, he's a great guy.
I'm all about that as well. Like, it's rather than being like, oh, for fuck's sake, what are you doing? I definitely want to help in that situation, 100%. I wonder, I wonder that, like, when I think back to going to Berkeley, for instance, a lot of years ago, 25 years ago, and maybe this is just me, or it's a very individual approach to it, the shame I would feel not knowing the bridge to Nika's Dream, or just insert anything of anything. I would
can assure you, I don't know any bridge of any song.
But at that time, like the it wasn't even pressure. It was what was encouraged was at the time what it felt like a very healthy encouragement to learn, like to be good, to have this repertoire. You're there for a reason. This is the reason. Are you in? Then you're all in. You know, and now I see someone who's like scraping through a blues and they've already been there 2 years. Like, what's going on? Like, why haven't you addressed this 18 months ago or 23 months ago?
Yeah, I wonder what that is. I'm kind of undecided, like if I want to agree there with you, because about maybe this 2 years of like, you never know. Like maybe the 2 years, like trying to kind of fumble through the blues, may be the right thing for that person, because that person maybe doesn't want to have anything to do with the blues, like in a way. Because what's happening is like a lot of, and that's like jazz education doesn't come from a tabula rasa.
Right.
You don't come from a whiteboard.
Yeah.
You're coming from something that already has. It's a very rich painting.
Yes.
So you're kind of like presented with something that maybe you don't really like the aesthetic so much.
Right. But that's exactly it. The amount of times I ask the question, like with playing a blues, or I'm instructing them or breaking down what they did, I'm like, so who are your favorite band? And the first thing they say is like Dream Theater.
Yes.
I'm like, well, why are you here?
Yeah.
Like that is very true, actually. Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah, exactly. Why are you here? Or even like,
why don't you do that?
Yeah. Why don't you do that? Or then, okay, like now you can become aware of the fact that we're dealing with something very different here.
Yeah.
So it requires a different kind of swagger. Let's just say like mental swagger.
Sure.
So do you want to try it?
Right. Yeah, and also I'm amazed that like there are actually so many similarities. I can find similarities between Dream Theater and a blues. I can find 10 right off the top of my head and try and make that connection for them to get that light bulb moment.
Yes. But you know, there you go. I think like if really the interest lies in one specific kind of music with a student, let's say, right? The question is this really a music student? Okay?
Right.
So, and again, like, and if it's not, then the question is, do you as a teacher want to find ways to get the student excited about music in general? Right? And sometimes it's really just not about the music, it's about what's attached to it. Like I keep saying that, you know, maybe like one of my favorite bands, The Cure. So maybe they started out playing the music they played because they wanted to attract girls. I don't know. It could be.
I think there's a high chance of that.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but still they make great music.
Yeah.
And it turns out to be great music, but they didn't know.
Yeah.
You know, well, I pretty much think that they loved music when they started making music. But anyway, so it really doesn't matter what the original motivation was. You can still get excited about something, even at a later age, right?
It's crazy to think that with jazz education, the goal is already set, kind of.
Yeah.
It's not that discovery of like what I want.
That's why it hardly works.
Yeah.
But it's also like not everybody is made to be, say, an explorer, right? Or a creator, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah.
I think that you can pretty much sort of think of the world as we know it, as it's described in, Greek, what is it, tragedy or like theater of the, ancient Greek, like you have the gods and you like the mythology, you have the gods, Greek you have mythology. The demons, and sort of like where, okay, the gods are sort of like the people, let's just call them people, that create the materials that others can work with.
Yeah.
Right. So you could have gods, you could have demons. Demons, let's say, my definition would be those people that can create the materials, but they can work with materials that others create.
Sure.
So they are creators as well, but in a nested system somehow, right? So and you need all these sides. So that's why you have somebody who writes a song, you have somebody who performs a song.
Sure.
The performer doesn't have to be the writer doesn't have to be the performer, and all of these options they're there, and we need to be aware that like maybe that one person that's struggling with the blues is probably one of the greatest songwriters of all time.
Right.
Right, and that's sort of like how I see it, and that's why it's important to make sure not to discourage people, but to kind of like give them a way to find what they are really passionate about.
Yeah. When you embark on a project, what are you looking for in those collaborators, like with the stuff with SF Circus or actually any of these? I'd listened to so much. I think you put out 423 albums in 2022.
Yes. That's correct.
But like what is it that turns you on about like, oh, this is the right moment? Does it come from a place of composition and you first and then you go in search of the other person, or?
No, like in the most band projects I have are completely improvisational.
Yeah.
And what I'm looking for in those people is that freedom and listening and joy of exploration, and really that's what it is.
Yeah.
And like my band Anchor and Burden, which is sort of like one of the main things I'm doing these days, is really meant to kind of like demonstrate in a way for myself, not actually to others, but for myself, what is possible if you adopt the mindset of total freedom, but total freedom not in creating noise, right? So, but in doing in collective improvisation. But as I said before, improvisation as composition,
right?
So how can a group of people resonate so well with each other? That, I mean, just like that Get Back film with the Beatles, right? Like it's a long process. They did like 3, 6, whatever weeks of that. But you can go in the studio with a few guys, and you can sort of develop a vision like that, and you can execute it right away.
Yeah. And
that's sort of like my interest, and to see how really the listening, and I think that's probably what it is, the listening skills, sort of slot in with the playing skills, and so it needs to have the same level and same value for the person, right? So and as you know, it's like maybe the most difficult thing really to learn as a musician, to be able to play and listen at the same time.
Totally.
Right, and so that's really, I guess, what I'm looking for in people that I'm playing with.
Right,
and then even within that context. Like, even if you are listening, to never question your intuition, to maybe do something that may step on somebody else's toes.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you texted me from the studio. We now share this studio that we went to. Was that your first time there? When you texted me in La Casa Morada?
No.
Oh, you've been there many times.
We started recording there 7 years ago.
Oh, wow. Okay,
actually.
so
I'm with Asaf and Mark Wingfield.
I'm the rookie here. Yeah. So, but in that instance, when I was cutting my new album last year, that was all about pure trust, which I think you have to have. That's what you're talking about, right?
That's what I'm talking about,
yeah. And the fact that the drummer will just change the tempo in the middle of nowhere, and everyone has to accept that it's the perfect thing for the song.
Exactly.
And then it is.
Exactly.
That was very, very nice. That was like, okay, I could play with this trio for the rest of my life type of nice, you know.
And really, it's also with the Stickman, with Pat Maslotta and Tony Levin, it's kind of similar, even though we don't write in improvisation, we write together, but like we never question each other's parts.
Right. And your parts are very interchangeable, especially you and Tony. I noticed the other night at the show, I was like, hang on, how is Tony suddenly, no, that's Markus. Okay, how is, no, that's Tony. You know, it's very much back and forth with the way it's orchestrated.
And sometimes we kind of take that into account when we compose, but at other times we compose and then we play. I may be playing Tony's part and he plays mine live, you know?
Right.
But yeah, it's the trust, as you say, it's the trust and like just not, I mean, this is sort of like, you know, if you're really getting deep with psychology,
please.
Right? One of the main issues that we have as human beings is that we always want to be right. Okay, and that leads people to commenting or believing that they need to give their opinion or, you know, their 2 cents about everything,
right,
and anything.
Yeah.
And that is a problem. I mean, let just people do their job.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, obviously we're in the wonderful position where we can work with people, where we can have that trust. There's no, you don't need to question.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, you know, a musician of your career you want to pick. You don't need to question what they do because they do what they do.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully you hire them because of that, right?
Yes. Yeah, you hire them, or you know you're in the wonderful situation where it's a real band.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
And there it doesn't make sense to question the contribution of the bass player.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that's why some things are so awkward. Like when I think about Tony Levin, you know, playing on what is it, like a Dire Straits record, and the bass player is there, right? Like the original bass player is there. And, you know, I talked about that with Tony the other day. Like it's awkward.
Yeah.
You know, was awkward for him as well.
Yeah.
Right. So the producer brings in a different bass player. Like why?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's a tough one. Thankfully I haven't had to experience that. As nice as it would be to play on a Dire Straits record, that's And yeah, I think I feel maybe the most ever in my career as an artist or whatever, band leader, shall we say, that I have a band, which is a very nice feeling. And especially we made a documentary about the whole process, and of course each band member was interviewed that I didn't hear, so I edited it, so I got to hear the whole interviews. And what was amazing was listening to the guys say exactly what I wanted from them, but having never said it to them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they were both excited about the fact that we were just going there and we were just going to play, and there was nothing really, there was no framework, and that was exciting to them. So it was really nice to hear that after the fact, and the fact that it worked out.
That was usually happens when you just let things be.
Right.
But
it has taken me a while to get to that space, I think.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
As for anyone who's listening out there, like thinking about, well, how the hell do you get there? Like, maybe don't put pressure on yourself to make it happen. Like it didn't feel manufactured at all. It felt honest and it felt natural.
You know, it's a little bit like. So obviously, I'm a proponent of practicing, right?
Okay.
Yes.
Same.
However, right, sometimes not practicing may be the exact right thing to practice.
Right.
Right. It's also practicing.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and once you, I think as a musician, once you start accepting that you go with the flow and let life is life. And, you know, there's one way of saying it, which I love. There's life before death.
Okay, yes.
Right? So you actually have to live. And so, you know, that's why when people come to me who haven't played in 30 years, and they start playing again, and they realize, wow, you are incredibly talented, and you didn't do this for 30 years.
Right.
It's kind of, it's sad in a way, but it's also, it makes me incredibly happy that then they are there with me, and you see like, wow, you're making beautiful stuff here. like, and then I kind of like feel sometimes not feel sorry for them, but I kind of like see, okay, what kind of pain must these people have gone through,
right?
Like pushing that aside
To not do that,
for like work and family,
yeah.
So there's that's where the balancing act really is happening. So how much work do I actually, how much social contact do I want? I mean, I was lucky. I have to say lucky that as a really young boy, I was basically on my own because my father had a bad accident.
Okay.
And sort of like the family situation changed so much that I kind of like had a lot of time on my own, and I was able to kind of channel that time and energy into acquiring more musical knowledge. That was before I was playing.
Okay.
Right, so it was
listening.
when I started with listening. When I started like dabbling on keys and stuff, and there's always a time in one's life where you can, I guess, what people call woodshed here.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe you only need to woodshed for like a week, and then the result of the woodshedding for a week will be that you have fuel for like 6 months.
Right. Sure.
Right, and that's sort of like also important in terms of arts teaching.
Yeah.
Not, as I say, not institutionalized.
Yeah.
To allow people to take time off.
Yeah, and allow those phases to come and go.
Yes,
it's
and that you used the word before, which I haven't gone into. You used the word shame. Huge thing. Shame is a huge thing. It really is the, you could say, the opposite of the driver of life.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And
it's the downtreader of life.
And like shaming is like the number one thing how people act within musical circles. It's that, like, you're playing a wrong note. No.
Right.
No, I'm figuring it out.
Yeah.
Right? That's sort of like, no, you don't tell me what's wrong. I'm figuring this out. My fingers are not doing yet what I think I would want to do.
Right.
Don't tell me it's a mistake. No, I'm figuring it out.
Yeah.
Right. And that requires courage. Like I said, I got lucky. From a very young age, I was aware of peer pressure and this kind of thing, and I knew, okay, like, you guys want to go play pool, like billiard, and smoke.
Yeah.
No, I'd rather be home and listen to music, or I work on,
Yeah,
whatever.
I'm the same way. I was exactly the same.
I mean,
way.
I know you started so early. I mean, your career started so early, right? Like, you were probably 18 or something, or
when I started to play gigs and touring and stuff. Yeah.
So I started actually practicing or playing when I was 20.
Oh,
it was super late.
Okay. Yeah, and I think I came to the bass late because I was 15 when I came to the bass, and I was already 10 when I came to the classical guitar. So yeah, it's been a while. It's been 30 something years of playing music. That's interesting. So did you feel at the time, like, were you aware, like technically maybe, that you were playing catch up to be where you wanted to be, to realize the things you were hearing?
Did
you feel any pressure?
Didn't have any technical skill level on any musical instrument before I was like 20 years old.
Okay.
I was sort of like talented enough to be able to play like classical guitar. Like, I remember I had my first classical guitar lesson when I was on my 15th birthday.
Okay.
It was. And so I was able to figure things out. Like, I knew I could read music.
Some basic mechanics.
Yeah, so basic mechanics. But it was always just like putting things together in the moment. So there was never this idea that it could come through me rather than through the written music.
Yeah, through the page.
Right. So that's how I learned music. Right. And that never inspired me to actually practice. Because I was like, I could do that translation, rather badly, but it was enough.
Right.
And I had to, when I was 18 years old, I went to a guitar craft course with Robert Fripp, and that was the point where my life changed, where I was being shown, and I saw that actual, like, work changes oneself, right? So that something like that was possible, and so that's why, it took me a long time to kind of like catch up onto the idea of learning, as sad as it may sound.
Yeah, but we all arrive at the place at the right time, I think, right?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I think all that time that I did not have the mode of practicing, I was basically forming my artistic self.
Right.
That's how I look at it.
And actually, I feel that's what's missing in so many players who go through the institutionalized version of education, is that they don't spend enough time listening. Like, I always like, somebody will ask a question like, I want to be better at walking bass.
Yeah.
Well, can you name me 20 legendary walking bass players right off the top of your head? And did you transcribe 500 choruses of Paul Chambers? You know,
But you know, the funny thing is, like, and you do it too, right? You don't have to say 500. Like even one.
Oh yeah, one. Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like you start with one.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean. Like we have, as part of our culture, it's kind of ingrained in our language that we say things this way.
Yeah.
Right. And this is where we need to be more careful and look at ourselves to like, how do we go out into, and how do we put our love out into the world?
Right.
Because the reason why you said that was coming from a point of love.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
and it's because what I did, but it's not right for the person who hasn't done, who's
and
done
also,
zero.
And also, like I say, as a starting point, like if somebody hears 500, they're never not going to start.
Right.
But if they start with the first bar, 4 notes.
Yeah, sure.
Do like your B flat major.
Yeah.
Which notes do you play?
Right.
And you start there, and I find that that's powerful.
Sure.
Because you kind of like you are sowing a seed, and then it starts growing.
Yeah.
As you said, like the aim is already defined in jazz education.
Yeah.
and that's why it's not working.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always trying to encourage the step beyond that, you know. You see the goal that everyone else sees, but there's another one beyond that none of us know what it is yet. Only you will find that. And it's sometimes I do wish I had more people to see that realized in terms of students. I think that would be awesome. I think I would learn a lot from it as well, looking at the process.
I mean, you're making your books, which I think is a wonderful thing, because you know, it's material that's out there that people can work with and do work with.
Sure.
And so I think like the best impact you can have actually is the one that you don't see.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is it you know, obviously it means that you may have dry spells in getting positive feedback.
Okay.
Right? So maybe like for a few years you don't know
what's happening out
have the
there,
books actually worked, let's say,
right.
for people. But then you realize like 20 years later, you know, somebody shows up and you're like 65, let's say, right? And people say,
like, oh,
hey man, thank you so much.
Right.
Thanks for doing that for me. Right? You never know how many people you're touching.
And I'm not. It's not something I crave. I'm not looking for that positive feedback, but I also do understand that it takes a couple of decades to seep into. You know. Well,
I have to say, I had phases in my life where I was craving some positive feedback.
Okay.
Really, where it was just like I'm just kind of like throwing stuff into the void here.
As a musician.
Okay. Yeah.
I think I crave that, but that's to me the live performance.
Yeah, which you always had at a young age.
Right, that's very true.
So for me, it started like when I was 38 to actually go on the road. So I was kind of like always prepared to go out.
Yeah.
But I never had the opportunity.
Sure.
So and so that's why I then concentrated on producing records, on experimenting. Like, I mean, it was good because I had all that time to build my musical persona, and you know, I wouldn't have it any other way now.
Right.
But yeah, you've always had the live performance.
Yeah, the live performance thing. Yeah, interesting that it hasn't always been my own thing, because I did so much work as a freelance musician, as a sideman, touring and pop and all that stuff. But I've been writing some short films for YouTube recently, and really digging back into that, and realized when I listened to some old bootlegs of my first band in the UK that being a band leader or the artist or whatever you want to call it was the number one most important thing right from the beginning.
Yes.
Which is not something I see that often. A lot of people aspire to be a studio musician or a touring sideman, which is great, you know. But I was like, oh shit, I did want to do that right from the beginning. And I kind of have to remind myself of that when you get in the low parts.
Interesting,
you know?
Very good. Like I think like one of the most beautiful things that I've experienced is that when I was able to build bridges from like my old self, let's say, to my current self.
Yes.
Meaning, and I think it's something that like everybody can try. Like, okay, like maybe you're only 20 years old, but remember like this little lick that you maybe came up with when you were 14.
Yeah.
And try to use it in a song now. Don't just say maybe it's not good back then, I wasn't good enough, or blah blah blah. So always believe that the things that you did and came up with at any point in your life are valuable and worth it to be explored.
Yeah.
So for example, like one of the pieces that we played, that we're playing with Stickman now, is a song that I had written when I was 15.
Whoa.
And like I realized, okay, like let's bring this one back.
Yeah.
And bring it back into a completely different world.
Yeah.
And it's, I would say, maybe the most moving piece of the set. People always come to us afterwards and say, "What was that?"
Yeah.
Amazing, right?
And that's from so long ago.
From so long ago, and I try to do that like regularly to kind of like to look back.
I like that building bridge thing.
It's building bridges,
yes, I like
and
that.
so it's sort of like, in a way, you're in terms of again of like some sort of psychological thinking. It's like it's healing, like you're integrating an old part of yourself. You're making peace with an old experience, with maybe like the thoughts you had about yourself when you were a certain age or whatever. Like it's this idea of the inner child, which you maybe have heard of, right? Yeah. So to kind of like really start taking care of that part in yourself, because it's never gonna go away.
Right.
It's there.
Right.
So you start looking after that inner child, right? In order to find. And again, question mark, like, because like peace or happiness or freedom or whatever it's gonna be, or maybe less anxiety or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But there's something like, or you start integrating, you integrating yourself. And that's what I mean when I say bridge.
Yeah, I think I'm also reconciling all the work I did as well since then when I do that. And the funny thing is, it also works between people. Okay. Right. So you can also say, and this is something that I did. I really loved the music of the 20th century up until, say, the 50s. Okay. And so by taking, like, just something very simple, like the 12th tone thing that Schoenberg did. Yeah. Right. And okay, like then I was like 14 and I had heard about that concept. I started writing music with that concept, sort of like building a bridge. Yeah. It's like an old idea, right? And I bring it into my world where I was listening to David Thorne and, stuff like that, which had nothing to do with it, like in a way, but sort of like you take things that somebody else has come up with, and that is in the past, and you sort of like apply it now for it to have relevance now. And so that's how you can you can pick from any resource there is. And it's interesting listening to your music as much as I have intensely in the last few days preparing for this interview. I heard so many different things that I imagine are not your intent, but they exist within the layers of what you've listened to and consumed over your life. And I'm talking about, like, you listen to something completely free and distorted and angular that you've done with SF Circus or something, but then in the depths of it, I'm hearing the fucking Yellow Jackets or something, like it's something very seemingly non-connected, but there are these layers to it and Holdsworth and this, that, and like you said, 20th century classical music and Schoenberg and 12 tone. Yeah. Holy shit. Yeah. And that's exactly the good word. Like it wasn't intended. Right. And it's not intended in a way, like it's intentionally not intended. Yes. I have to put it this way because intentionally unintentional. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Which means you allow yourself the freedom to do anything. Yeah. And like are you aware of Nick Birch? Yeah. Yeah. So Nick is a friend of mine. Oh, okay. Right? Like we've known each other for almost 20 years, and like we all have these discussions, and like he's always so particular about, like, okay, if you play,
you have to play something. He says it has to be something.
Okay.
And I said, no, Nick. No, it said it can be anything.
Anything, yeah. Have you got him to make an example of him playing anything rather than something?
I don't know.
Okay.
But, we have these discussions all the time, so I'm sure that what I say to him has some sort of influence
Impact,
on him.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but he released one of my albums in 2017.
Okay.
Falling for Ascension.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. And, yeah. No, but we've been friends for a long time. And, there you go, like language, right?
Yeah.
Something, anything.
Yeah.
But it makes a difference.
Big time.
Like, how do we think about, how do we chunk the world? How emotionally charged are words?
Yeah.
Right? What do they remind us of?
Yeah.
Right? And it's that level of awareness, especially in as we say, music teaching or arts teaching. That's what makes the difference.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a very nice place to end the discussion.
Yeah.
Leave it open for future discussions to happen.
Yes.
Because I think we're just getting towards language, and I think that's maybe one of the most important parallels in what we do.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to have a discussion with you and my best friend Antonio, who's a PhD linguist from Oxford and also a musician. And I've been scheming the language discussion for a while, and I'm like picking up more people that I want to involve in it. So.
I have some opinions.
Yeah, I'm sure. All right. So we'll stick a pin in that. I will say thank you for taking some of your precious time to be
Thanks,
here.
Janek,
And go check out all Markus's music. I've been listening on Spotify. I'm sure it's out there on every platform. Highly recommend that. And if you're in the US and listening to this on the West Coast, Stickmen are on tour now. And on tour in Europe in November of 2023. And you told me also about a project that's happening with Trey Gunn
and Pat Maslow in
this summer.
August.
Okay.
In August, and that will be on the East Coast. So
on the East Coast of the US. So go check. What's your website?
MarkusReuter.com.
MarkusReuter.com.
Markus with K.
Yes, Markus. Reuter.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce it?
Reuter.
Reuter, ja.
Reuter.
Reuter, genau.
Ja. Genau.
Gut, vielen Dank.
Ja,
Tschüss.
vielen Dank. Tschüss.
Woo! All right, let's shut these down before they...